Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us. I'm Joylette Portlock, Sustainable Pittsburgh's Executive Director. Welcome to today's event. We are very much looking forward to using our time today to explore the ways we can forge a better future for all. As an organization, Sustainable Pittsburgh works with hundreds of organizations in the 10-county region, and especially with local government, other NGOs, and the business community. Many of you will be very familiar with our role as host to the CEOs for Sustainability Executive Roundtable, which is also co-presenting today's event and which has championed carbon reduction as a key regional business imperative since 2020. I want to also acknowledge Ray Yeager, CEO of Sustainability Leader DMI Companies and co-chair of the CEOs for Sustainability, who is also here with us today. Ray, if you are available, did you want to say a few words of welcome? I'm not sure, we can't hear you if you are speaking. Maybe we'll come back and offer Ray another opportunity to greet everyone a little later on in the program. I'll move on for now. The effort to decarbonize our economy represents an alignment of interests necessary to meaningfully address climate change. It also creates unprecedented opportunity for regional leadership and growth. Every report that projects a pathway for our economic future agrees that our regional decarbonization strategy needs to weave together improvements in many sectors: manufacturing, power and energy, buildings, transportation, land use and agriculture, and more. And we'll be exploring those today. It's critical that underpinning all of it are approaches to workforce development, community engagement, and technological innovation that dismantle inequities and support the opportunity for prosperity for all: Black, white, rural, and urban, the entire diversity of the region. So today we have a full agenda. And we will be moving into a debrief from our June event, Regional Economic Development Opportunities from Decarbonization, Regional Decarbonization. We're happy to continue that conversation with you today. Following that, we will be happy to share with you opportunities and resources to help us achieve those goals. I think everyone is aware of new opportunities created at the federal level with the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. So we will go through some of those resources. Following that general set of updates, we're going to hold an interactive breakout session to share additional sector-specific feedback, information, and resources. And during these breakouts, our goal is to obtain your feedback on what next steps we should continue to advance a regional decarbonization strategy. We want to really use a strategy or employ a strategy that centers on equity and comprehensively addresses the challenges that we must address in order to reduce the carbon intensity of our economy. Next slide. So as I stated earlier, this has been a priority. Carbon reduction has been a key regional business imperative since 2020, as represented by the CEOs for Sustainability Executive Council. This is a slide that shows the 3 priorities of the Leading Forward initiative that was begun by that group at that time to support local communities in crisis, to advance racial and ethnic equity, and to reduce carbon emissions. And I'll give Ray another chance to see if we can get a couple of words from him, despite some potential technical difficulties. Okay, well, I'm not hearing anything, and I hope that we are able to, at some point, get Ray on the phone. I believe he's joining us by phone today, to welcome you all or to potentially wrap us up. But in the meantime, let's move on. I'm going to turn over the microphone to Matt Mahoney, Director of Government Affairs with Sustainable Pittsburgh, to do a synthesized recap of what we've learned so far in our decarbonization conversations in the region, and to talk some about those opportunities that I mentioned a second ago.
Thank you so much, Joylette. And as Joylette mentioned, my name is Matt Mahoney, Director of Government Affairs with Sustainable Pittsburgh. I'll be doing a quick review or a debrief from an event, an in-person event we held entitled The Regional Economic Development Opportunities of Multi-Sector Decarbonization. During that event, we had keynote speakers, Kate Gordon from the Department of Energy, Special Advisor to the Secretary of Energy. And as Joylette had mentioned, we had focused on a broad set of sectors, so buildings, industry, energy and power, agriculture, and land use. And the primary purpose of this event was to bring together stakeholders from across multiple sectors and exploring the opportunities for an equity-driven, forward-looking, comprehensive, multi-sector decarbonization strategy. Moving along to the next slide, we'll see that we held a panel, and during this panel, we asked questions of our panelists that focused on supply chains, manufacturing, beneficial electrification, workforce, transportation, and some general questions to better understand what efforts are needed to advance a decarbonization strategy. Some of the feedback that we received from each sector included specific items such as how and where we source our products, and how we're working with our partners in the supply chain to reduce uses of carbon-intensive products. Concepts such as circular economy and reducing the amount of plastics that are used in consumer wares was addressed. And another important aspect was educating customers. So our panel discussed a lot about how educating customers throughout their networks and ensuring that they're aware of opportunities for decarbonization. Further, we focused a lot on the workforce. We also focused on the workforce and what workforce development opportunities are related, such as in the energy efficiency and building automation systems sectors, and how we can reduce use of energy by either installing clean energy technologies or reducing energy use through the reduction of energy use. We focused also on equity by engaging and training all communities and ensuring those that are often left out of conversations are included. We also discussed forward-looking approaches on how to train workers to ensure that the jobs of the future are available today, or that will be available, that we have the workforce ready today. We also talked about beneficial electrification and how some industries can work together, how we can work with industries to identify those areas of opportunity and expand workforce development opportunities. In other areas, we discussed, again, more opportunities for clean energy, and especially within the industrial sector, how manufacturing plays a significant role, especially in our region, and how we can leverage that legacy to advance into the next generation of clean energy and a decarbonized economy. Now moving on to the next slide, we see that during our event, we held a breakout session, a brainstorming session, where we received over 33 completed worksheets where we discussed, where we conducted an exercise called Purpose to Practice. And in our breakout sessions, we'll discuss a little bit more about what we found and learned from each individual sector. But during this time, this information has become invaluable in learning what are the steps necessary in obtaining that, or in understanding what is necessary to achieve a multi-sector decarbonization strategy. And so moving on to the next slide, we can see some of the feedback that we did receive from a variety of, or from everybody collectively. So for the first, if we move on to the next slide, for the first question, we asked, why is a multi-sector decarbonization strategy important for our sector? And we'll see that a few of the key components that rose to the top include quality, community, collaboration, development. So these are some of the elements of why we need to achieve that decarbonization strategy and why it's important for our region, to ensure that we're remaining competitive as a region, that we're reducing emissions, and we're aligning across sectors. For the next section, for the next question, we asked all who are the participants that need to be involved in a multi-sector decarbonization strategy. And as you can see, the largest response that we received across all sectors is that this is not a one sector question, that everyone needs to be involved. And we need to work with stakeholders across various segments of society, including government, communities, philanthropy, all the way through production, supply, and value chains, throughout value chains. On to the next, we explored what are the structures that are necessary to be a part of a decarbonization strategy, and how do we organize and distribute control to achieve our purpose. Again, working with communities rose to the top, but also some of the concepts that are recently coming out of federal legislation, such as the Justice 40 initiative, that provides a mechanism to allow for 40% of those proceeds to benefit those disadvantaged communities. So ensuring clean energy and workforce, those funds and the benefits are received in communities that need it most. Also, another interesting element was the concept of road mapping and evaluating what are the opportunities and who are the stakeholders and where are the networks and how do they exist and how can we integrate them to achieve that decarbonization strategy. And finally, we discussed practices. So on to the next slide, we see that education is a primary component of what is necessary. And part of what we're doing today is providing education and insights into the resources that we've been able to glean from recent legislation, as well as feedback that we received from every one of our stakeholders that have participated thus far. And we've noticed that those connections are incredibly important. And each sector has very specific interests in in activities that they can accomplish to achieve decarbonization across a wide variety of their business operations. And in some, for example, in the building sector, we learned that utilizing and leveraging existing building stock has a very high potential for reducing decarbonization. So we do not have to utilize more resources and more materials and more raw materials, further contributing to embodied carbon throughout supply chains. So moving on to the next slide, we'll dive into some of this, some of the feedback, the sector-specific feedback we received during our breakout sessions. But before we jump into our breakout sessions, I'd like to review some of the federal opportunities that have recently become available for decarbonization. So first, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which by now most of you have likely heard of, was signed into law over 6 months ago and provides a historic amount of investment in infrastructure. The potential for the transformative change that the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act has provided is dependent on the actions of our local leaders and the ability to leverage our current and strategic priorities focused on multi-sector decarbonization. Over $1.2 trillion has been activated across 125 new programs and 225 existing programs, showing the breadth and scope that this bill highlights the important opportunities available to showcase our region's alignment with the priorities and principles included in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Applications that will attract the most attention from relevant departments and government agencies are those that can include a focus on local supply chains and local economies and bringing domestic resources, leveraging domestic resources. At least $38.5 billion from our analysis is available or will be available in competitive opportunities across multiple sectors that have a focus on decarbonization. Emissions include a number of aspects of the economy, meaning a multi-sector decarbonization strategy does require an all of the above approach. And there are opportunities broadly across manufacturing, grid modern mobility, transportation, circular economy infrastructure, and dozens of other programs across sectors where our region stands to grow. And to maximize the transformative potential of this bill, every sector that represents a segment opportunity has the potential to engage and needs to engage. Some of the consistencies, if we move on to the next slide, that are consistent and have been growing as a theme throughout each of these recent federal legislative activities is aligning those actions with consortium-based applications. So collectively applying with stakeholders that have applying a multidisciplinary lens when applying for certain funds. those consortium-based types of programs, to make the most out of it, require those cross-sector partnerships so we can work towards that common goal of decarbonization. Again, the Justice 40 initiative is a national effort that calls for federal agencies to work with state and local governments to ensure at least 40% of the gains from federal environmental justice investments benefit disadvantaged communities. A whole of government approach is what the Justice 40 initiative aims to provide. It is a framework to measure the impacts of federal programs that focus on clean energy and energy efficiency, workforce development, and environmental remediation. There's also funding available for upskilling the local workforce. Again, providing career skills training for classrooms or on-the-job training. Funding is available, and again, with that Justice 40 lens applied, ensuring that those funds are being provided in communities that could use them the most. And of course, buying local. Domestic content is a strong focus that is a consistent theme within each of the pieces of legislation that have recently been passed. And so buying local, raising awareness, and driving action toward keeping our dollars local so we can keep our communities growing is part of our regional decarbonization strategy. And on to the next slide, I'll briefly just cover I've already covered some of these, but there are dozens of new programs across various sectors. And some of the opportunities are available now, while more will become available over the next several years due to schedule. But again, the central theme in the infrastructure bill is the goal of decarbonization. Now moving on to more recent legislation, the next slide includes a focus on the Inflation Reduction Act, which was signed into law just recently last month. Included in the Inflation Reduction Act are over $369 billion across a variety of different tax incentives, rebates, and other avenues to advance decarbonization across a variety of sectors. Some of the primary focuses of the Inflation Reduction Act are very consistent with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, such as domestic manufacturing and driving domestic production into our country and utilizing local resources to drive to increase utilization of decarbonization technologies locally. There's also a strong focus on energy and environmental justice communities, including programs that provide grant funding specifically for these communities and providing flexible dollars in the form of grants to allow communities to develop programs and implement them in partnership with other institutions locally to drive more investment in decarbonization. Some of the specific areas onto the next slide for decarbonizing business that's included in the Inflation Reduction Act include a focus on small businesses for research. So the first program that I have listed includes up to $500,000, which has been doubled from the previous bill for research in technology and utilizing research in technology that is focused on decarbonization. That funding is available for small businesses, small to medium-sized businesses, to advance research in the areas of clean energy and advanced energy technologies. There's also support for more environmental labeling and environmental declarations. So those products and services that you're identifying within your supply chains, seeking out those that have environmental declarations or environmental labeling ensures that the products that you're utilizing within your own operations or supplying to customers has a lower amount of carbon embodied into the processes. So we're reducing the carbon intensity of our economy by leveraging these resources. There's also a host of tax credits for clean energy manufacturing across solar, wind, geothermal, and other clean energy, as well as energy efficiency. Within the tax credits for clean energy operations, installation of solar on a facility, tax credits have increased significantly, as well as providing bonus credits for implementing programs in energy communities, environmental justice communities, and other area and Justice 40 communities. There is a strong focus within the Inflation Reduction Act that focuses on those energy and environmental justice communities that I'll cover here just in a second. But moving on to how we can decarbonize some innovations. One of the more exciting pieces of the Inflation Reduction Act that we've come across includes the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which provides $27 billion to initiate a green bank that allows for low-income communities and disadvantaged communities to deploy zero-emission technology, including distributed technologies such as rooftop solar and other avenues to reduce carbon emissions in environmental justice communities. The investments that are made available will be distributed across the country, and there will likely be qualified capital providers providing funding for qualified projects. However, this is important to know because in our region, there may be stakeholders that are well equipped to circulate capital on specific technologies, such as solar or manufacturing batteries. However, this isn't limited to just our region, where our region can obtain insights and expertise from other regions and their efforts to decarbonize. Moving on, another program that includes a lot of flexibility and opportunity for decarbonization includes the neighborhood access and equity grants. These are administered through the Federal Highway Administration and funds $1.9 billion through 2026 to improve the walkability, safety, and affordability of transportation access. There's a lot of flexibility, as I read the legislation, for technologies such as noise barriers or even natural infrastructure, air quality monitoring, all with a focus on greenhouse gas emission reductions. States and planning organizations are eligible recipients. However, again, harkening back on what some of the requirements from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, including applications with partnerships with eligible entities, including nonprofits, will surely have a better chance of obtaining some of this funding to activate decarbonization strategies. Another interesting program that I quickly mentioned earlier is the Environmental and Climate Justice Block Grants. This program provides $2.8 billion through 2026 for community-led air and other pollution monitoring, prevention, and remediation programs, especially for those technologies that are low or zero emission and resilient technologies related to infrastructure. There's also a focus on workforce development to help, again, reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other air pollutants. Eligible entities within this program include community-based nonprofits, and again, partnerships with community-based nonprofits will also receive a higher level of analysis or special recognition when applying for these grants. So those are some of the resources that are made available through the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And so the point of this introduction is to have our brains start churning, start to think about the opportunities within your own sectors to advance a multi-sector, equity-driven, forward-looking, comprehensive decarbonization strategy for our region. As we move into the next session, we're going to encourage you to share your thoughts on what are the tools that your sector has to enable and activate a decarbonization strategy. But what we're really focused on are what are our next steps. With all of the resources that are made available through federal legislation and likely through state programs that are made available in the coming years, there are many opportunities to advance decarbonization. And so we want to hear from you what our next steps look like per sector. And so on the next slide, before we jump into our breakout sessions, I'd just like to quickly thank our breakout session facilitators for agreeing to help us help the conversation along. So we've invited Bill Flanagan from the Allegheny Conference, who's going to help discuss and facilitate a breakout session on industry. Janine Zapra from the Energy Efficiency Alliance on power and energy. Chris Cieslak from Green Building Alliance, who's going to discuss buildings. Chris Sandvig from Mobilify on transportation, and Sarah Nicholas from PASA Sustainable Agriculture. So at this time, we're going to ask that each of you, the group that you identified when you registered, you will be assigned to that breakout room. And please bear with us as we break out into those rooms, but please know that there will be one Sustainable Pittsburgh staff that will mostly be sitting in the background and taking notes. At the beginning of that session, we'll circulate a link for a Google Doc where you can include your notes if you don't have a chance to speak or you'd prefer to list your comments. But again, we're focusing on next steps. So we're really hoping to solicit that feedback from all of you during our breakout session. We're going to try to commence or finish our breakout sessions by about 3:30. And I've provided instructions and a little bit of guidance, but I hope this is a free-form conversation where you're able to share your feedback. And again, focusing on a multi-sector, equity-driven, forward-looking, comprehensive multi-sector decarbonization strategy for our region. So bear with us as we break out into breakout sessions. All right, give folks just a few minutes to join us back in the larger group. Okay. Just gotten word that we're all back. So I hope that was a valuable session for everybody to discuss some of the questions. And I'm sure, as I can say in my breakout session, our expert breakout facilitator did a phenomenal job, and I hope each of yours did as well. At this time, I'm going to call on our expert facilitator, Chris from Green Building Alliance. If you would, and I'll ask each of our facilitators in order, but to report out on some of those high-level learnings and then conception of what our next steps should look like within that sector. So Chris, I don't mean to put you on the spot immediately, but you did a fantastic job facilitating that portion and figured you were already primed and ready to go. So
well,
Chris.
I see that you're flattering me in order to butter me up to go first. So yes. I'm going to talk really slowly so the other moderators have time to figure out what they're going to say to the group.
Yes, and I ask if we could limit feedback to about 3 to 4 minutes, so we have enough time and we wrap up by 4 o'clock. But slow and steady, I will delay as well. But again, we're asking for some high-level 2 to 3 high-level pieces of feedback that you received during that breakout session, and then a few thoughts on next steps.
Sure. Okay, so I talked to the buildings, the folks that were interested in the built environment and buildings and how to decarbonize buildings. And I would say that there's sort of 2 or 3 themes that came out of our conversation. And one is just, generally that our sector, and I'm sure this applies to many sectors, but there's a lot of difficulty in prioritizing decisions. There's almost a paralysis in knowing what is the next step to take after the low-hanging fruit has already been picked in order to effectively decarbonize the built environment without making the mistake of doing it in the wrong order, in the wrong sequence, making the wrong decision, and then locking in the bad decision for the next 20 or 30 years until your next renovation or new building project comes along. So that would be probably the top barrier within our discussion today. And then the other need, and I've seen this in my own work as well, is the need to regulate. And so, we have spent a lot of time encouraging voluntary action and voluntary commitments to decarbonize. We've gone a long way with that. We've focused on individual actions. We've scaled that up to collective impact. We certainly, all of the nonprofits here in the region celebrate the collective impact of the work that we're all doing. We have the numbers to back it up. It drives the point home. It gives everyone credibility that we're actually making a difference in the greenhouse gas emissions coming out of the built environment. But that collective impact and that personal responsibility only goes so far. And it's now time for, it's probably past time for systemic change. And that means regulation. That means bringing up the stragglers, basically giving even the sort of the big middle of people a level playing field so that they can rely on, everyone in their building sector is going to have a minimal level of requirement in order to do what they need to do to decarbonize the built environment in the time frame that we need to avoid the worst impact of climate change. So I think that's pretty much it. That's my report out.
Thanks so much, Chris. And I'll move on to our other Chris Sandvig, who facilitated the breakout session for transportation. Chris?
Let me get the notes up here. Bear with me 1 second.
No worries.
Okay, well, so one of the things we did on the level setting side of things was we talked about how this is one of the largest sectors nationwide, the largest single polluting sector, yet also one of the most decentralized sectors as it comes to trying to deal with an issue like this, given how many users are involved in it. There was a lot of discussion back and forth between fuels, electrification, and then we also were in a lot of the land use discussion because of the fact that a lot of, I often refer to them as naturally low carbon transportation choices, walking, biking, taking transit, do not work well in an environment that is not built to do that, which is a lot of our region. We also talked about the fact that so much of what we do in transportation is entrenched, everyone acting independent, and the fact that a lot of past efforts in these areas have been sort of in many of the business cases, whether public or private sector, have been more driven by a champion and not necessarily embraced as part of the culture. And so the leadership there really waxes and wanes with who's in the driver's seat on making those choices and decisions. We also talked about the fact that, particularly in regards to electrification, electric bicycles don't really have much of a standing in the new infrastructure law, which is a real issue given that is one of the largest, if not largest, sectors of electric vehicles in the market right now. The other thing we spoke on here was how in the United States, not only do we have this issue of very little funding going to other modes other than the car right now, but also the fact that how that money is programmed and the requirements you have to jump through to get it make it incredibly difficult to build new systems or even improve and upgrade new systems so that people who are riding the bus can ride the bus with dignity, or the train for that matter. And the fact that we really need to be focusing on that and getting other players in here who are engaged in the transportation discussion, but are not fixated on transportation discussion as most of us that were in our panel are on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, Chris. Very good feedback. And now we'll move on to our industry sector breakouts, where Bill Flanagan was providing or facilitating that breakout session. So Bill, if you could take yourself off mute and report out for us.
Absolutely. Great discussion. And by the way, Chris, I am really bummed to find out about the electric bikes because I was just about ready to go out and get one. I guess I'll wait till spring until they can sort out the policy. But at any rate, we had a good discussion. And I think the one thing that struck me is sort of the spectrum of where industry is on this journey. We have the sort of the awareness to embracing it, and so many of them so much of it seems to be at the awareness end of the spectrum, sort of the changing the light bulbs piece, rather than really tackling major changes to their industrial processes that can really tackle this problem. One of the big issues we talked about was simply managing the data and getting the data and getting the information. The industrial processes are so complex. As one of the companies said, you can look at your electric bill, you can look at your gas bill, but it only tells part of the story about what's really happening inside your operations. So trying to identify the tools that can really help figure this out and give you actionable information. If you need to go out and purchase more reliable or lower carbon power sources or energy sources or whatever you have to. Just really difficult because the data challenge is so significant in terms of what companies are dealing with. I talked a little bit about the need for being able to better connect with universities and those types of resources to do it. The larger players, are saying that, yeah, they have very active university partnerships to really help them identify pathways forward and how to make this journey. The smaller, and we had 2 reps from Catalyst Connection who work with the small and mid-sized manufacturers across the region, all 3,000 of them. And, their take was it's just very hard for that small business that's just trying to make payroll to even get its arms around or develop the capacity to engage directly with an expert from a university. And then beyond that, it's not just being able to engage, but many of them, which I guess is a good thing, are sort of beyond the changing light bulb stage. But once you get beyond the changing light bulb stage, then you really have to get more customized solutions, which requires even more time and attention from experts who can help. And again, smaller manufacturers especially just lack the capacity, the internal capacity to really take on that challenge and figure it out. We talked a little bit about supply chains and whether it's possible to galvanize, or whether anybody's taking ownership of their supply chains in terms of encouraging them to go down this path. And again, some of the larger companies appear to be taking that seriously, and they're encouraging their suppliers. One example was, if packaging shows up from a supplier and it's styrofoam, they tell them they don't want styrofoam anymore. And by and large, their suppliers are receptive, and they'll the next time it comes, it won't have styrofoam. But at this point, not a real, engaged and dynamic process. So I guess what I came away with is just the distance we still have to cover beyond awareness to embracing this, and then the very real challenges along the way, given the scope of industrial processes and the challenges of addressing them. And even develop the information that one needs to be able to make those kinds of decisions, which will require an investment. So I think that sums it up. Gina, you were on there. Does that sound right? You can give me a thumbs up if I got it. Yeah.
Excellent. Great job. Thanks.
Yes, very feedback so much. That was fantastic. Covered a lot of really great points. We'll Sarah Nicholas from PASA Sustainable Agriculture, reporting on land use and agriculture. Sarah?
Hi, thanks for the opportunity. We had a small but mighty group. We covered a lot of territory. We sort of unearthed the inevitable conflicts over land. Nobody's making it anymore. And there's always a tussle over how it's used, and the wrestle between farming, food production, and energy. And manufacturing has always been in Pennsylvania. We zoomed in on solar energy a little bit because there are a lot of pressures for farmers to convert land use to solar right now. It's currently not allowed in the ag preservation program at the state level, although interestingly, gas and oil production is. So we talked a little bit about whether we could make some improvements there. And I guess in the good news department, there's an unprecedented amount of funding flowing from USDA right now. Matt, you mentioned the infrastructure and the Inflation Reduction Acts, and through the Inflation Reduction, we just got $20 billion of new money for farm conservation practices. And that sort of led to a discussion of, it's not just the amount of money, but it's how it gets spent. And can we help ensure that it gets distributed equitably? There's still enormous barriers to many people, especially underserved farmers who can't access this money for a variety of reasons. It's starting to get attention, but there's a long way to go there. And the other good news is that a lot of these conservation practices like cover cropping and no-till not only sequester carbon, prevent runoff, multiple environmental services, but they're fairly cheap to install. So it shouldn't take that much money to get an awful lot of farmers in compliance if we have the will and public pressure and education and technical assistance. We talked a little bit about the need for planning as we look at the landscape and how we best fit, solar and energy production where it belongs, farming where it belongs. Farming is only going to get more important in Pennsylvania as other parts of the country get worse and worse for farm production. So we have to be mindful of that. And then finally, we talked a bit about urban agriculture and the new attention that's getting and its ability to focus on local production, local sourcing, a much more equity. Land access is still a big issue, but there are some encouraging signs at the state and federal level and more attention and funding on that. So that's where we ended up.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was fantastic feedback. And it sounds like you had, like you said, a small but mighty group. Very well said. Okay, to bring it home with our final facilitator, Janine Zappa from the Energy Efficiency Alliance on Power and Energy. Janine?
Yeah, hi there, Matt. So I want to apologize to my group because I don't think I was a super facilitator today like Chris Cieslak, but I do think we ended up getting to some really good themes here. And we treated power and energy, sort of just de facto as how do we shift to a decarbonized use of energy? We didn't explicitly discuss power and energy in that way. But the three, what I would say, and I'm going to ask the group to chime in if you see difference, but the three overarching themes were really around a significant need for coordination across the region and to align existing programs and for state level leadership. So coordination and a real plan for action. And that those things feel like they are conspicuously missing from any real effort to get to a decarbonized economy for Southwest PA. And there was several mentions of strong need for leadership at the state level, whether on Green Bank or other funds or coordination across programs. There was an expression of a need for coordination of how to report carbon and to create a standardized baseline, whether it's through corporate ESG reporting, different scopes of emissions that's coming, or having a certain level of academic rigor applied or a more standardized approach, and to get all levels of citizenry to participate. And I'm sorry, excuse me, just a second. And then we had, secondly, theme was carrots and sticks. So I would say that that was really around combining both penalties and incentives. And the notion of RGGI came up and a carbon tax, and then the notion of the needing an improved alternative energy portfolio standard and renewable energy portfolio standard for our state. So it was really that balance of both of those policy drivers to drive change as well at a leadership level. And that we need, the third theme I would say that came out of our conversation was really around communities, and we need engagement, involvement, and information at a community level. We would need an informed public to gain buy-in to the needed actions, whether that's needing more infrastructure for grid expansion, so that what we don't want is saying, yeah, we need that, we want that, but then when it comes to being in my backyard, I'm going to go, no, absolutely, I don't want that. So there's a lot of education that's needed. And already some of the pushback that the previous facilitator was speaking about relative to solar development and farming. And then the last piece of equity or community is really around equity, right? And how do we make sure that our decarbonization efforts are affordable for everyone, especially those who are low income? And even with the forthcoming already authorized rebates and programs, how do we make sure that that actually happens and gets deployed through a channel that effectively ensures that people are using it? So I'm going to pause there and ask my group if there's anything else that you feel those three major themes aren't playing back in our discussion. Okay, I'm going to assume that's a yes. Yep, go ahead.
And I will note, Janine, I believe your group was the largest group, so you had the most to try to get to contribute. So we had everything from small and mighty to large and in charge, if you will. But thank you so much to each of our breakout facilitators. Fantastic feedback, very much appreciated. At this time, to bring us on home, I'd like to ask Joylette to wrap us up. So Joylette?
Thanks so much, Matt, and thank you to everybody for participating in those groups. I'll try to be brief in closing here. I think today's conversation showed us that a decarbonized regional economy is still going to take a lot of work, an important imperative goal, as I said at the outset, but one that we must dedicate ourselves to figure out, all the how, all of the how. I did want to just highlight quickly, again, some of those key needs that I heard in our breakout session, as well as in the report out from the others, around policy and regulation as a key need, around organization of the regional conversation as a key need, because, and I really like the comment that it's not just the amount of money that's enabled here, but it's how it gets spent. It's all of the different pieces that need to be pieced together so that we have a holistic and coherent and effective and equitable decarbonization strategy for the region. So thank you all for being here today and helping us to continue to keep that regional conversation organized. I also want to thank the CEOs for sustainability. Once again, I saw several.
Joylette?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Ray, perfect.
Very good. Okay. I just want, I apologize for my difficulty with Zoom driving on an interstate, but since you brought up CEOs for sustainability, I also, while I wasn't able to welcome people, I am pleased that everybody was able to come and participate in this particular session. And thank you, Joylette, for being patient with me.
No problem at all. Thank you. I'm glad we were able to hear from you in the end. And yes, thank you very much for those remarks. And thank you to all of the CEOs who were able to join us on this call today. I saw several. I certainly couldn't adjourn without thanking all of our facilitators for lending their expertise and making the time today to help us continue this conversation and participate in these discussions. So thank you to everybody. I'll just close by pointing out that we do have a Global Clean Energy Action Forum happening in Pittsburgh later this week. So please do join us. Sustainable Pittsburgh and CEOs for Sustainability will be hosting a panel, Innovative CEOs Enabling and Expanding Decarbonization, at 10:15 on Friday at the David Lawrence Convention Center. So if you are registered for the forum, we hope you'll join us then. A reminder that Sustainable Pittsburgh's recognition programs are in existence and a great way to access comprehensive sustainability frameworks for your organization. So look for more on that and on an equity focus coming this fall. And once again, thank you. If you have questions about the content, please reach out to Gina or to Matt or to Gina. And for sponsorship inquiries, please contact Gina as well. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day. Really meaningful content, and you'll be hearing more from us that helps to continue to distill, synthesize, and move the conversation forward.